right. My name is Adam Bosch. I'm with Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress, and we are here as part of our Main Street Hudson Valley initiative, which we started in earnest this year and is meant to provide advice and planning and research and other resources to Main Streets across our 9-county region in the Hudson Valley so that they can be as vital downtown areas as they can be. Adaptive reuse of buildings, good planning for our main streets, business supports, all sorts of things are wrapped under the umbrella of our Main Street Hudson Valley initiative. And I'm here today with Tony Jordan, who is the president of the Parking Reform Network. Tony, thanks for joining me. And I want to start off with just a quick story that will lead into our first question. We're going to do 7 questions with Tony today. I was sitting with a colleague and a friend of Patterns recently, and we were talking about the different topics we should hit on in our Main Street program. And both of them looked at me and said, you know what the important topic is parking. And I wasn't convinced, and they had me read some journal articles and some academic articles. And what do you know? It turns out that parking may not be the most exciting thing to the lay person, but it ends up being really important to how our downtowns function. And so I reached out to Tony to ask if he'd come on and talk about parking. Clearly, I wasn't convinced right away. I had to be convinced. So maybe, Tony, you could help convince the people in our region, why is parking important to downtowns and main streets in any town America?
Well, thanks for having me. Parking is, important to main streets and downtowns. Because it's important anywhere we're building places where people are living and working and recreating and shopping. It's when you first, everyone interacts with parking one way or the other. Nearly everyone, of course, but it's so ubiquitous, and it's ubiquitous because we've required it everywhere. But very few people, I believe, until even more recently, recognize why that parking is there and what it means to have parking supply or to build parking supply, how much it costs, how much space it takes up, and how we decide where it should go. I think that the real reasons, there's 2 big reasons parking is critical. It's really expensive, right? It's expensive in dollar costs if you're building structured parking. Structured parking spaces, $20,000 to $60,000 for above ground spaces, right? Even more for underground spaces. Even surface lots, right? They cost money to build and maintain, and then you should be processing water and runoff from them. And then you have an opportunity cost of the space. They take up so much space. Average parking space, the car is only part of it, right? You have to have aisles and clearance and egress and entrance and et cetera. So an average parking space takes up about 300 square feet, which is it's like the size of a small efficiency apartment, or it's the size of a small coffee shop. There are businesses that fit into this, that can fit in the size of the amount of one parking space. And in fact, when we look at what regular requirements are in many cities around the country, minimum requirements for parking, like a common one is 1 parking space for every 300 square feet of gross floor area for a business, which means that the parking lot is going to be as big as the business that it's serving. And so if you look, you can look at Google Maps and look at any city, drop in, and almost every one you're going to see just this it's like a dark matter pressing the downtown, or pressing the city farther out, and that makes it difficult for walkability. It makes it difficult for sustainable building patterns. It's hard to it's not good for the tax base. Very few places use a land value tax, so they aren't generating a lot of revenue. It's once you look into it, it's very hard to not see how much this thing, it impacts how we get around and how we live and what we pay for things.
Yeah. So Tony, you mentioned a lot of different kinds of parking. Obviously, there's flat ground parking in municipalities. Some have parking garages underground or above ground. Obviously, we have on-street parking. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not. For our communities, which have been around here in New York for a long, long time, and their parking in many cases has been established for a long, long time, what are some of the strategies they should be looking to employ as they think about reforming their parking? What are some of the factors they should be considering? What are some of the new ways of thinking about this that they should be engaged in?
Well, so I mean, the basic concept around parking reform, which has kind of been promoted for the last 20, well, I mean, for many decades, but you know, more recently, since his book came out in 2005 by Professor Donald Shoup in UCLA, is to, you know, eliminate your minimum parking requirements. So stop telling businesses how much parking they need to build. Stop telling or they need to provide, and stop telling developers how much parking they need to build. Leave that they have a financial interest in providing enough parking for their consumers or their tenants, so they can be trusted to do so. If the on-street parking that you have, which is usually the city owns it and it's very valuable, is managed properly, is managed responsibly. So usually that requires pricing. If there's high demand for parking in a certain place, like we do with many other essential and non-essential goods, frankly, in this country, we use pricing to manage demand. Otherwise, if it's free, you know, an employee who could park 2 blocks away and is going to park there for 8 hours is going to park 2 blocks closer because why not? No one's telling them not to. And then a patron can't park close to the business. So manage your on-street parking, stop requiring parking at arbitrary ratios, and then reinvest the money that you collect from that pricing in, traditionally, in many main streets, it might be for beautification or pedestrian improvements, but it can also be used to subsidize bus passes for workers, or to provide additional crosswalks or safety improvements. I mean, there's a whole host of things you can do with it. One thing I would not recommend is building another parking garage or saving up to build a parking garage with it. So those are the 3 main tenets. I think that the for most main streets, really, starting to price that value, show the value for the parking, especially now we see after COVID, like there's more realization of what we can do with this space, right? This is potentially a whole, a great way to bring more people and enjoy downtown, so let them enjoy main streets with businesses in the parking right, in the current former parking right away. And so really recognizing the value of that right away and using it to generate wealth, but also provide use it for the best use. Sometimes auto access is what you want for it, right? And sometimes maybe it's a restaurant, or maybe it's a bike lane, or maybe it's a transit lane.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the key tenets, you just mentioned it now, but one of the key tenets that your group puts out there is that free parking is bad. And maybe I'm oversimplifying that. And I think you just made the case that free parking sort of allows stagnation, right? It doesn't move people along. But I mean, can you explain just why free parking is bad?
I mean, so I'll there's a whole variety of levels of where people fall on their opinion on this.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I would say free parking, sometimes no one wants to use the parking, right? You shouldn't necessarily charge for parking that currently exists that very few people want to use, right? If you're the only person in a parking lot and there's 100 parking spaces, probably that's not worth charging for, unless there's some, but in anywhere people think of there being a parking problem, a free parking space is not great, because it's not, well, for one, it doesn't encourage turnover. It doesn't allow people to have access to what, people want to make choices. One of the ways we make choices, one of the ways we show how much something is valuable to us, our time or our proximity to our location, is by our willingness to put skin in the game, to pay for it. So if you have free parking, you're denying someone the ability, who has needs to run an errand, to be able to pay for parking close to their location. So it's not great for access. It also sends signals. It subsidizes the use of cars when maybe, we know that car driving can be very expensive on society. Someone driving, of course, they pay gas and insurance, but they're also creating particulate emissions and other types of emissions, and it's noisy and it's dangerous. But and I guess this is a case where even that big suburban lot I mentioned with 100 parking spaces, even then, an employee driving there and parking for free, you're subsidizing a cost for them that maybe even someone riding the bus or riding their bike isn't getting a subsidy for. So it does encourage more automobile use. But I think
Sure.
ultimately it's disconnecting the value of this very valuable space and the impacts it has on the community from the person using it. And we want to, people should be aware of the value of the thing that they're using.
Sure. So I think you mentioned this, but I've covered my previous career as a journalist, a lot of sort of parking disagreements in communities. And one of the things that we typically hear, the argument for free parking, is something you mentioned before, which is for the pizzeria owner or the dry cleaner. It's, hey, if the parking outside my shop isn't free, then people aren't going to be able to swing in and get my pizza or pick up their dry cleaning. I mean, how do we deal with that paradigm? I mean, how do we deal with that argument? Is it that some of the parking should be free for that kind of consumer convenience in certain cases, or that there should be some other system in place? I mean, how do we deal with that?
Cities are really looking at this a lot. That I have seen it. This is a big question. I mean, there's definitely, with the advent of rideshare services, Lyft and Uber, with more delivery, food delivery, Amazon pickup, drop off. There is a big push towards thinking of this curb zone as being a more flex zone and having a space that's good for pickup and drop off. So I think that, yeah, I mean, many cities allow for ample pickup drop off space. I mean, it should be considered that pizzeria or whoever, if there's a lot of traffic that is impacting the local community, right? You have people driving there. So how can you think of ways to maybe mitigate the amount of extra traffic that parking is attracting? But I think that's possible. I mean, I think that technology might allow for more micro transactions, so you're not paying so much. Businesses, could always subsidize the cost for, like, a restaurant can always validate parking or pay their patrons who came by car for parking if they so choose, if that's really the cause. But I think one of the things I would push back on for that pizzeria or that dry cleaner is, well, if the parking is free, then you don't know if the person, once someone's parking there, they might walk down the street and hang out at the coffee shop for 45 minutes, and then no one can come pick up their dry cleaning or pick up the pizza because they're there. So I think there's different strategies for how we, manage that on-street parking. But the fact is that there are strategies, and they're pretty, I think once people sit down and think about them, they're pretty obvious how you can facilitate commerce with the amount of roads we've got.
Yeah, and the next question I was going to ask you started to hit on, which is, what role does technology have to play here? Because when I talk to some folks I used to deal with in Europe, they mentioned that in their downtowns, there's actually people who've gotten pretty used to reserving parking ahead of time in some cases and doing things like that. That's not something that's really come our way yet. It may be in New York City and some of the larger metro areas in the country. But when you get into our medium and small size downtowns, main streets, that kind of technology is not very ubiquitous. So what role does technology have to play in parking, sort of going ahead here?
I mean, I actually think that in a way, the mid-size or smaller, like the non-metro areas, have a leg up in rolling out this technology. So the technology has come. Obviously, cell phones and wireless stuff is much more ubiquitous. And I mean, even to the point where, 5-10 years ago, you would still, and there's still an equity concern, like there are people who aren't comfortable with technology, but really, like, I mean, it's pretty much out there. You can, and there are, there are strategies for, if you have an entirely, digital experience for paying for parking, most people coming to a downtown are going to a business. So the business can always have a kiosk or use their iPad that they're using for, checking people in and out of the restaurant to pay for your parking, validate your parking for you. There's lots of apps out there, Passport, etc., pay by phone. There's a number of companies providing this. And I think that one of the benefits is it's much more flexible. You're not, and traditionally, installing a meter system for your city could cost a lot of money. You're entering into long-term contracts with a vendor. You have to have all sorts of maintenance, money collection now, and you have to really think out, right? You're planning like where these zones are going to be or what you're going to meter, and you have to really think out about how you're going to do it. Now, you can do this all virtually if you want to, and I think that's definitely the direction it's heading. And then since the technology is more flexible, it's like the types of things like reserving or more dynamic pricing where like, okay, sure, if I'm coming into downtown at 11 a.m. and no one's around, maybe I should only be paying a small amount of money. But if I'm coming in during the dinner rush, probably I should be paying a bit more. And if I'm here on Saturday or there's a festival or a street fair, probably the pricing should be a little higher. So these apps allow for this kind of thing. And then
that almost sounds like congestion parking pricing.
They're very related, and I think that cities that are looking to people are used to paying for parking a little bit. They don't like it, but they're used to it more than congestion pricing. So I think that is a strategy. I'll also add that there's other apps that help people manage. There's also a whole ecosystem of technology that's helping people to manage existing off-street and private parking. If you have a garage in an apartment or an office that's not being used much at certain times of the week or day, there are apps that are really helping to people unlock and reserve parking in those places. And that's great because, when a lot of cities think they have to add parking supply, and you really want to do that at the very last resort. And so looking at what parking exists in your city and maximizing its use is the key. And even if you have enough, maybe you can remove more street spaces for restaurant use or, other purposes rather than just having cars parked in them on your main street.
Yeah, I'll share. There are, I would say, few cities and villages that are using apps ubiquitously in our region. There is one that I frequent, and one of the things that I enjoy about it is you don't have sort of meter anxiety like you used to. So
right,
if you're going to sit down for a dinner and you've paid, they have the city broken up into zones. So I'm parking in zone 52. The app knows my license plate, which means, the person walking around and checking that everyone's paid can see that my license plate is paid. But if I'm having a really good dinner with having an engaging conversation or something, and I know the meter's running out, my phone will let me know, and I can just swipe to add 15 minutes. And it gets rid of some of that meter anxiety as well as making the parking well organized. So I can attest, at least in one place that I visit pretty often, that it works better than that traditional sort of brick and mortar system. So.
Right. I mean, parking meters cost so much, and I really think, it would be better. I would not encourage most places to have, a full rolled out meter installed at this point. It's,
Hey, look, let me ask this. Here at Pattern for Progress, I think we're big advocates of saying, hey, we don't have to reinvent everything, but it is smart for us to look at places that do it right, learn from them, and try to replicate what they do well here in our region. So, Tony, is there a place that you're aware of in the United States that just really gets the parking right? What is that place, and how can we look to them to learn?
I mean, so much of this is, depending, I mean, there's places that do various pieces of it right. I'll say, I don't know, hard to say of a place that's got it all, like putting all the pieces together, right? There's so many different strategies, like changing your pricing throughout the day, or allowing people to stay as long as they want in a space, but maybe increasing that price a little bit every hour so that there's a nudge or a recognition that you're taking up a lot of, time in the space. We have this parking reform network has this map of cities that have eliminated or looked at parking. Oh, sorry, we have that map, but we also talking about something different. We have a guide for parking benefit districts, which has a number of case studies of cities. Most of them are larger cities, like we have, I think, Pittsburgh and the Short North in Ohio, and Columbus, Portland. But most of these, they're using this concept of, I would recommend every city looking to manage parking to look into doing a parking benefit district. That's where I talked about kind of using that money. It's the idea that, you're raising revenue. It shouldn't just go into a black hole for the general fund. Some of it should come back into the community and ideally be guided to some degree by the community that is where the parking revenue is being placed. So I think those cities are the ones that, are usually more incentive. It creates an incentive to increase, to actually manage the parking by demand, and to use that money in pretty good ways.
So can you give me a smattering of ways that they're using that revenue in these parking revenue districts? I mean, you mentioned plantings and benches, but are some of them using it for, like, I don't know, facade improvements or other? I mean, what's the range of things they're using that funding for?
Absolutely. So like the first of these, the original example was Pasadena, Old Town Pasadena in California. Donald Shoup writes about it in The High Cost of Free Parking, where, the downtown was kind of, it was run down a bit. They instituted paid parking. They put a bunch of money into this benefit district and used it for, like, street beautification and I think maybe, helping wayfinding to lots nearby where people could park, and really improve just the general quality of the experience. So that's one thing, is you can spend it on trash cans or cleaning up. Some places have spent it on, maybe you have people who are ambassadors walking around to help people. Other cities use it to improve at least some or all of it, to the idea, because one of the things is, like, we're going to reduce parking minimums. So people say, well, how people aren't going to drive, how are people going to get to the downtown? And so you say, well, we're going to spend some of this money to make it easier for people who aren't driving to get to downtown. So maybe you use it to provide better bus shelters, or you use it to, provide, to build bike lanes, or you use it for, Portland has a program called the Transportation Wallet, where money from meter and permit districts go into this package of subsidies, of subsidized transportation benefits that workers or residents can get. And there's a deeper subsidized program for low-income workers and residents, where they get like a bunch of bus credit, some bike share credit, ride hailing credit. And that really, then you're really kind of putting you're showing, look, we're trying to not only manage what we have, but we're trying to actually help more people get here. Especially for workers, that's a great program, right? Because then that's one less car that's there all day in the neighborhood. That's really going to free up, if you can get a person to not drive to work, you're really going to free up a lot of their
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think one of the impediments for communities that say, hey, we're stuck in a rut when it comes to parking, or we're just doing the same thing we've always done, is just how to get started. So what would you recommend to a community that says, hey, we'd like to tinker with some of this stuff? How best to get started? What's something simple they can do to get started down the path of asking themselves, should we reform the way we handle parking?
I mean, first, I would say, well, look around and see what other places are doing is great. Find out what's going on at what is the ground truth in your community, on your main street, right? A lot of people will say, oh, it's hard to park, there's no parking. And then a block away, maybe there really is a lot of parking. Maybe you've got many cities spent a lot of money building a parking structure, but people, if the parking structure, a lot of times the parking structure will cost money and the on-street will be free, right? And it's like, it should be the reverse, right? You paid a lot of money for this parking structure, but the on-street parking is the more convenient aspect. So I would say one of the first things people want to do is just build a parking structure, and you should look at how much that's going to cost to pay for itself. And until you can expect someone's going to pay that amount per hour on street, then you have no business building a parking structure, right? Because it's not gonna pay for itself. If people aren't willing to pay the price to park directly in front of the restaurant where they're going, why would they be willing to pay that price to park around the corner in a garage? But I still think just to go back, like getting an idea of what's happening in your city, who's parking, right? Like, is it residents? Is it consumers? Is it workers? And then I think nowadays, as we discussed with the apps and things, it's pretty easy to try a pilot program, I think. I mean, obviously it's not super, but if you want to try, metering your parking on one street with an app, I don't think that's probably, it's not nearly the same level of investment as it was before. Even, I mean, consultants will recommend a series of escalations. You have time stays, and then you go to metering or permitting. But I think, nowadays, I think, it's pretty well established that metering works to increase throughput and generate revenue.
So that's good. Yeah. So Tony, if people want to find the maps of places that have gotten rid of minimum requirements, or if they want to find any of these resources that you've talked about, where can they go?
So the Parking Reform Network's website is parkingreform.org. And then we have like a resources tab where you can see the mandates map, which has some small villages and things in New York on it, actually, is places that have gotten rid of their requirements entirely. And then like that parking benefit districts guide is linked under there. And then if I would suggest, if you're a civic leader or a planner or advocate involved in this, you can get on our list or join our organization. We have a Slack community that is very knowledgeable. So like a lot of the Parking Reform Network really wants to accelerate these kinds of reforms by sharing information and supporting the people on the ground doing the work, through coalitions. So certainly if you've got an organization that's working on revitalizing your main street and you want access to parking professionals, we're one way, we can help. There's consultants that might, apply your RFP, or, just if you're looking for speakers or people to help with messaging, that's what we're all about.
Great. So Tony, what you're saying is that I was wrong. That parking is really interesting and important, and you've disavowed me of my my assumption, which is good.
It's everywhere. I mean, it's a real thing. I think it's fascinating. And I'll just to say, like parking itself is worth managing just for the space and money sake, but the benefits of reforming our parking policies extend to housing affordability. They extend to climate action, water quality, heat island effects. It's a win-win-win situation usually, plus it's revenue positive. So it's very hard to find policy changes that actually can make revenue and do good things at the same time. And this is one area where I think just there's so much good that can come out of learning about and making progress on this topic.
Right.
Yeah.